Hello everybody and welcome back to the Code Wrinkles channel for a brand new video, this time about Blazor. And in one of our previous videos we talked about Blazor components and how to create Blazor components the right way by splitting the markup code and the C# code basically in two different files. Today, or in this video, I think we just want to build on what we did so far and try to understand exactly how could we nest Blazor components so that we have a very clean look and feel of our Blazor application. This will be very helpful because it will make our app generally more maintainable and easier to read, and also easier to ramp up for new developers that might start work on our Blazor application. But before we get started, I just want to emphasize that what we see here is actually more a principle about how to go around or how to think about our components and about the UI that we want to build using Blazor. Because Blazor is actually a programming model that offers us the opportunity to really create a composable UI, and we should really take advantage of it and compose our UI based on very small or smaller components, not on very large HTML or Razor files. So let's get started with this, and before we get it going, I just want to present you the application with which we start. And this would actually be an application that we'll use as a starting point for an entire video series that we'll do about Blazor, about components, about state, about how we can communicate in components and so on, because there are really a lot of things that we can learn from it. So I just wanted to set up a very basic structure for it, and this is actually our starting point. Of course, I started from the template, from the Blazor WebAssembly template that we have in Visual Studio, and there are only a few things that I did here to adjust the application to our needs. So first of all, I have changed in the sample data that weather.json with a file called employees.json, where I basically have an array, a JSON array of employees with a few properties. But this would help us because we will get in our Blazor application a lot of employees that we can use to work with, and this could be very important then, or much more valuable than just having 6 weather forecasts, because we will be able to apply in later videos filtering and searching throughout this list and how we do this in our Blazor component. So this is a very important thing that I did. Then I also added some pictures, like a generic avatar for a female and a male. Of course, we want our employees to also have a very basic picture. And then what I did in this pages folder, I have deleted the counter component and the weather forecast component that come or that ship together with the template that you create basically when you start a new Blazor application. And I just have the index page, which will be our home page, and I didn't touch it so far. But what I added is simply another feature, which is called employees. And according to past videos that I've recorded, I always suggest that we should organize our Blazor applications according to a feature-based approach when it comes on how to structure our folders and files. So I have created a folder called employees, which will be basically the folder containing our employees feature with everything that comes around it. And for that I have also an employee model, which we'll use of course in our data service to get the information from the JSON file and map it to the employee that we have defined here. And I have added also an employee list component that would basically list all our employees using a bootstrap card. It's a very simple card, but we can already see that we have a few lines of code here, and that's basically also the point towards which we'll come back just a little bit later. Then one other very small thing that I did is, of course, in this list component I have also a backend class, and here I inject the HTTP client. This is the regular HTTP client that is injected in program.cs, so I didn't touch here nothing. It's exactly the same as it comes from the template. But here, instead of getting weather forecast, of course, in this case, I'm making a call and I just want to get an array of employees. So when I get this array of employees, I set it as a property here. And of course, this property I use in the Razor file, in the Blazor component, in the markup, and I iterate through each element of the array, and for each element I just display a card. So if we run this application, because I think it's important to also have an overview on how this application looks like right now, and then we'll try to go further and implement some basic new functionality that would make our UI, our front end right now, of course more composable and easier to maintain, easier to read, and overall easier to find things. So if I click here on employees, I just get here a list of employees, and I know that maybe it's not good looking, it's not perfect, the cards don't always align 100% correctly, but I'm really not a CSS expert, and I really won't dwell too much about these things. For me right now, it's important that we have this list of employees, and this is, as said, our starting point towards some very nice functionalities that we can use. Starting from this very simple list, we'll add a lot of different features to it, and we'll see throughout adding features how actually Blazor works, and we'll understand the internals of this programming model. So let's get started with what I wanted to present you today. First of all, if we look a little bit in this employee list component.razor file, so this is the markup for our employee list, which if we look at it, it seems to be very fine. So it's nothing too fancy. I would say it's not also a component that is huge, but still we have here some few lines of code. And the problem with this is that I know that most of us, when coming from an MVC world, but not only, we tend to just write for each view that we want to have basically an HTML file. And then everything that we need, we just put in that HTML file. Now, Blazor is a composable UI model, so this means that it's indeed very easy to just compose the UI by using different building blocks. What this actually means is that we can take these large components, because we can say, okay, this component seems to be fairly large. Of course, if we want to add more complex cards, of course, that the markup will become even longer. So what if we can just split markups and just nest different components on one component that is presented in the end to the user? So here we see that this component is also routable. It has this page directive that defines the route through which this component will be displayed. But here we can just remove parts of this markup in separate, totally independent components, and just use those components here as child components. This will make our UI easier to read and easier to understand, of course. So let's see how we could do this. It's really nothing very complicated. So for now, what we'll do here is we'll just create a new component. So we'll add new and Razor component, and we'll name this component employee card component. And of course, this is our code right now. This is our markup file. As said, as I just want to follow this pattern, I will create a new class which will hold our C# code. So let's create this new class, and we'll have to name this class employee card component.razor.cs. And what we'll do here, we'll say it's a partial class. And in this case, basically, what we can do right now is that we already have this C# file. So this purely C# file that is actually linked to our Razor part. So in this case, we can just simply go here and just delete everything. Now, what I want to have in this component right now is nothing really fancy. I don't need a page directive because this component won't be routable. I just want to display some information here. So I don't even need to inject any type of service because I don't need an HTTP service. I just get an employee that I really want to display, or to display all the information about the employee. So what I can do here is just start, sorry, I have also to use the @ because we are here in this markup file. So just one second. So we have if, and here of course we'll say right now if employee. Right now we don't have a property named employee, but we'll take care about this. So we say that if employee is null. Right now it looks and it finds the class employee, but this is not what we need, but we'll change this just in a few seconds. Only that I just want if we don't have an employee, so if the employee is null, let's use a heading just to display this loading information, and else here is what we'll put. Sorry, it's not It's not square brackets, it should be curly braces instead. So yes, that should do it. So here we'll place our code, but let's take right now care of this employee. So what we need for this component is basically a parameter. So we say here parameter, sorry, and we say this parameter is, of course, should be public, is of type employee, and it would be called employee get set. Of course, we would also have to add this using statement for ASP.NET Core components, because this is where this parameter attribute resides. And right now, if we go back to our markup, I guess that here everything is okay right now. So the only thing that we actually right now need to do is to simply go to this employee list component, and I will take basically everything that is inside this div, and I will just cut it, and I will paste it in this employee card component. Because in this employee card component, or this employee card component, will only be responsible to render a card that contains an employee. Of course, we need to do a few changes here. So first of all, we should change employee. We should change everything here to employee, because right now we have this employee property. And here we have once again employee. And I guess there's one more place where we have to take care of it, and this is right here where we display the department of the employee. And I guess that we should be fine right now. Let's review it again. So we have here the employee list component, and right now what we can do, and this is the very interesting part, or the part that we can really take advantage of, is that we can simply reuse in this component other components that we have created. So in this case, I will just say here that I want an employee card component, and I can see that IntelliSense already suggests me adding that I want to add, or I may want to add this employee card component. So that's exactly what I want to do. And here comes the very fancy stuff, because in Blazor there are different ways through which you can communicate state between different components. And today we'll cover in this specific component the parameter attribute, which is the first way to pass information or state from a parent component to a child component. But before we discuss in further detail how this goes, let's just define what is the parent component. The parent component here is this employee list component, because this is actually the place where we have called, or we say here I want to display a child component. So the employee card component is in this case the child component. And that's a very important thing to note, because this distinction between parent components and child components will be something that we'll talk a lot in a lot of further videos, because it's very important topic. There are several things or scenarios that you would have to take care of when you have this type of parent and child components. So this is really something that we would have to take care of. So once again, we have this employee list component, which is the parent component, and we have this employee card component, which I just said here I want to use this component. So instead of writing all the HTML here in the parent component, I just say, okay, here please render me the employee component and everything that I have defined there. And this means render the card according to all the information that we have here. And now let's come to passing data, because this is the first scenario that we cover right now. So this first scenario is when we want to pass data from a parent to a child, because what we want to do is to send data actually from this parent to this child, from the employee list component to employee card component. And we can do this, or we can achieve this, by using these properties that are annotated by this parameter attribute. So that makes basically, or this is the first option, or the main option through which we can pass data once again from a parent to a child. And the way how we do it is where we call the child in our parent component, we can simply say here, for instance, employee equals emp, because this is the item that I need. And this is, for instance, right now, if we imagine how data flows right now, we are in the parent component because we are in the employee list component, and we call this employee card component, and we say for the employee property, because I have used that parameter attribute, just pass in the current employee that we have here. So this means that once we get in this employee component, in this employee card component, then we'll have for the employee, we'll have all the information. So we'll have the photo, we'll have the name, we'll have the role, and we'll have, of course, the department. And right now, actually, you say it's very, very easy. And I guess that right now, if we run the application, it should display us exactly the same result. So we will be able to see exactly the same list of employees that we also saw previously. But in this case, actually what we did is that we split it all the information, and instead of having everything in just one single markup file or in a single component, we have decided to offload and create a dedicated component that would be only responsible for rendering an employee card. So it just receives an employee and it renders the card. And that's it. So you see, we have exactly the same things. So once again, the things that we did here was simply we created a new component that is called employee card component. In this component, we have created a property that is called employee and which is of type employee, and we have decorated it with the parameter attribute, which makes it available to get state from a parent component. And that's exactly what we do in the parent component, so this employee list component, because when we say please render me here the employee card component, we can say that for the parameter employee, just pass in the current employee that we have in this current round of the iteration through that employee array. So right now you can see that basically we had previously a 50 lines of code long Blazor markup here in the parent, and right now we have reduced it to just 19, which is very important. Now, of course, in the employee card component, we have a few lines of code if we go there, but the idea is that in this component, we just have the card. Because what we will do probably later is that in this parent component, we will want to add some different other things, like, I don't know, drop downs or search boxes for filtering or ordering or things like that. So this markup for this parent component, if we go for the, I would say, more traditional way, will become very, very long. So instead of having a very, very rich component, we have just decided to nest our components and create child components that we will be able to reuse here and to compose our UI just by calling out the components that we want to render at different parts of our application. And just like that, our code becomes just a little bit more readable, it becomes more manageable, and it's easier to find the code that we actually need if we have a problem that we want to fix, which I would say that is very, very, very important. So before we wrap up this video, I just want to say once again, as a summary, I think it's a very, very good practice that when you have components that are fairly large, just try to think about pieces of code that you can simply reuse, and try to put all those pieces of code or all those pieces of markup in dedicated, separated child components that you can simply call in your parent component whenever you want to display them. And you can also pass data to those child components using these properties that are decorated with the parameter attribute, just like we did here. And of course, we can pass a lot of more information from the parent to the child, but let's take it one step at a time. And I can promise you that in the further videos or in next videos, we'll go deeper into some very, very interesting techniques. For example, how we can communicate from the child to the parent component, because that would be also a very, very, very important scenario. So as you imagine, this video is actually part of a logical series of videos that would take us step by step from, let's say, getting started with Blazor to, I would say, a decent knowledge about the internals of Blazor and how Blazor works. So at the end of this series, I guess that each of you, if you go to the series, would be able to be fairly familiar with it. And if you have to start a new Blazor project, or if you have to work on an existing Blazor project, I guess that it will be very, very easy for you to find your way. If you want to know how to navigate through this series of logical videos, if you watch to the end, maybe right now, you will see here on this video some overlays, some links with links to the previous video in the series and to the next video in the series. So this is how you can basically navigate through the series, having or going basically from one video to another in the logical order of steps that I think might be very, very useful. So this being said, thank you very much for watching this video, and I hope I'll get to see you here for the next video in this Blazor series. So have a nice day. Bye.